Ireland's turbulent past has been the demise of many of its big houses. These stone symbols of a planted ruling class were obvious targets in times of trouble, most notably during the Civil War, when anti-treaty IRA forces made example of almost 200 of them.
While these attacks have left the Irish countryside littered with imposing empty shells, like scars from old wounds, this big house in County Armagh was not the victim of violence at all, nor did it leave a looming facade to remind us it was ever here. So what happened? The gentle rolling hills and apple orchards that give this county its nickname give way to flat open peatland at the southern shore of Loch Ness. Here, the River Blackwater keeps the County Tyrone at bay as it meanders its way north into the loch. The low-lying boglands still provide some industry here, while it quietly subsides and contorts the metalled roads above. Grand oak trees and green grass rise in stark contrast above the Scots pines and heathers at a place called Church Hill, in the townland of Mullinakills south, and the setting for this story. As we're in Armagh, this tale begins altogether predictably with the Ulster Plantation. Ulster is the northernmost of Ireland's 4 provinces, and by the turn of the 17th century had proved particularly resistant to the control of the English crown. The plantation was the solution for anglicising and subjugating the Catholic Gaelic population of the north by divvying their lands among loyal subjects. Mainly this was Northern English Anglicans and Presbyterian Lowland Scots. This followed the flight of the Earls in 1607, when the Earls of Tyrone and Tyrconnell fled Ireland for mainland Europe. They were the heads of the ancient Irish ruling clans, and had fought against the Crown during the 9 Years' War. Their exile effectively spelled the end of Gaelic Irish society in the north, and made it easier for James VI and I to steal and redistribute the lands they held. A Scottish family of Norman origin, the first Verners were planted in Ulster in the mid-1600s. The family took ownership of a vast estate in the counties of Armagh and Tyrone, and Henry Verner settled on a family home at a place called Church Hill, not far from the southern shore of Loch Ness. It was here that this great house took shape, as they often did in drips and drabs. By 1750, the dwelling was a relatively small 2-storey house, inhabited by the grandson of Henry Verner, Thomas. Thomas would die without issue and leave all to his great-nephew William. The family hadn't a title when they came to Ireland, despite their Norman origins. Their vast estate was enough to earn them a coat of arms and make them aristocrats in practice, if not in burks. The usual trappings ensued. Rents were collected, sons became MPs, army officers, etc. Young William would change that. He started out in the usual manner, was educated well, didn't much fancy Trinity College, so his father bought him a commission in the 7th Hussars instead. He would fight in the Peninsular Campaign in 1808 under Sir John Moore, before going on to serve under Wellington at Waterloo in 1815. William retired with the rank of colonel when his uncle's health was deteriorating, and returned to Church Hill, which in his absence had been shortened to just Churchill, and enlarged into the 3-storey Regency-era block we see in the photographs. At this point, William went into politics and became Conservative MP for Armagh. He also went looking for a wife, which he found in Harriet Wingfield, the daughter of the 3rd Viscount Powerscourt's younger son, Edward. His exploits fighting Napoleon must have impressed her, or at least her father, and in no time at all, William was Sir William, and later in 1846, under Queen Victoria, he was made a baronet. He died a popular and well-regarded man in 1871. William's son, William, the 2nd Baronet, succeeded him, but not for long. 2 years later, he was dead too. The 3rd Baronet, you guessed it, another William, is where everything starts to unravel. There's an old proverb on wealth. The first generation builds it, the second generation sees the hard work of the first and is inspired to maintain it, and the third generation squanders it, having never known hard work. Young William was born in the 50s and was actually 15 when his grandfather died, and 16 when his father died. The will stipulated he'd have guardians to look after the estate and make sure he didn't marry the wrong person until he was 21. Several days after his 21st birthday, he married the wrong person, an Australian named Miss Annie Wilson, who already had a son. The Verner family at large were not ecstatic about this. Young Billy had been a sickly child. He was educated at Eton and spent most of his time at the London house, Eaton Square. His father's will had stipulated that he spend a reasonable time each year in Ireland at Churchill. Obviously, legally, that statement wasn't even worth the breath, never mind the ink or paper, as a reasonable time could have been 50 minutes or 50 weeks. In the event, the boy spent very little time at Churchill. When he turned 18, his guardians sent him on a grand tour of America, Australia and China. When he came back to London, he met his Australian bride. And if the family were pleased about that, Billy's next move would have had them jumping for joy. He promptly engaged a new solicitor and had the estate disentailed. An entail, the aristocratic storytelling device of all time, think everything from Pride and Prejudice to Downton Abbey, is basically legal protection for an estate, to ensure it passes to a suitable, male, heir every generation, and stop it from being sold, gambled, or otherwise spaffed away by careless descendants. Think of it as a backstop against the effects of generations of arsenic ingestion and inbreeding. So when Hugh Bonneville is trotting out that old line about being a caretaker for future generations, there was some truth there. But for young William, it took just one good solicitor to unlock the vast wealth tied up in thousands of Irish acres. Billy's wife's son, Harry, took the surname Verner, because of course he did. The three spent their time between Churchill and London, living large. Large enough that just 9 years after inheriting, the estate was in debt to the tune of well over £60,000, and Billy was dead, to that most patrician of afflictions, cirrhosis of the liver. His wife followed him 2 years later, and both are buried here at Loughgall. The house, the London house, what was left of the estate, was left to Harry, or the son who bears my name, as the will records. Of course, the baronetcy couldn't go with it, and reverted to Billy's uncle, another of the Wingfield Verners. Harry was still a minor when his adoptive father died. He lived at Churchill and came of age in 1889. By all accounts, he was good-looking, hospitable and popular. But he hadn't learned from Billy's mistakes, continuing to live beyond his means. He threw lavish house parties with actors and dancing girls brought up from Dublin. That would have been big news in Little Tam the Moor in those days. Bigger still, the fact that he began living with a woman named Mrs. Logan, estranged from her husband. The locals, of course, referred to her as Mrs. Verner. He did his bit of public service too, serving as High Sheriff in 1896. The die, however, had already been cast for young Harry. He inherited the loans of the third baronet and racked up respectable gambling debts of his own. The London house was the first to go, number 86 Eaton Square. This was followed by much of the estate's outlying land. Churchill itself was put up for sale in 1898. Nobody wanted it. The house stands on a hill surrounded by many acres of peat bog, which of course belonged to the estate. The Irish Peat Development Company began buying up swathes of it in 1900. So too went the best timber of the house, and any valuable furniture. Harry staved off bankruptcy until 1913, and death until 1916. All that was left went to Mrs. Logan, including the unwanted and pillaged mansion, where she lived until 1918, until she herself decamped to a small, manageable cottage, taking with her what money and valuables she had left. She sold these off in bits and pieces over the years, and died in 1935. So where did the house go? It was left empty in 1918, having been stripped of anything valuable. By 1926, it was recorded to have wood rot. It and the remaining lands were actually finally sold in 1927. The bogland surrounding it belonged to the Irish Peat Development Company by now. The classical parkland estate on the hill would have been deemed good farmland, and the new owners wasted no time in demolishing the once great house. It was gone by 1928. At a glance, you would be hard-pressed to know that this was once a great parkland estate, not least because the M1 motorway was built through the southern portion of the gardens in the 1960s. The main house and outlying stables and walled garden were all demolished. But if the season is just right, a passing satellite can sometimes illuminate some of the old floor plan of the old manor. The main clue, still standing, is just to the south of the old house. The family grave plots. These remain upright and largely unvisited. One of the old estate cottages still exists as a private dwelling, albeit much expanded. The 6 gate lodges that once dotted the perimeter of the immediate lands have all gone, but the gate and railings from the southern entrance now form the railings of the old chapel up the road at Mahery. Perhaps the most prominent legacy is what is known as Werner's Inn. This old coaching inn was at a crossroads not far from the western entrance to the estate. It survives today as a filling station and an orange hall. The name Werner still adorns its eastern wall. The first baronet, of course.